What happens in the state sector is every single day when I pick my son up from school, I would get dragged in by the teacher. And it was, oh, Mr. Laurie, can we just have a word? That's fine for the first 20 times that it happens. But then all the other parents get to know that you're the father of that child, that naughty child that's always getting into trouble. And every time that teacher comes out and says, Mr. Laurie, can I have a word? Every single other parent in the playground goes, yeah, it's that child. And you become known as that parent of that child. You're a bad parent.
All the schools that we have been in, there has been a real desire to help and to support. So that's always been there. But I think the mainstream education for lots of children who are autistic, I think the support that's put in place is trying to enable that young person to fit within that school rather than the school to fit and support that young person, and so it doesn't work.
When I joined secondary school, I found it particularly hard not to fit in, but just to concentrate. Like, I started to really notice like ADHD and whatnot, sitting in class in like year 7, year 8. I left that school, and since I've come here, I've been able to help that quite a bit and just grow as a person.
There was this place called the Quiet Room, yeah. You know what a quiet room is, don't you? It's like basically where the kids get locked up, kind of like a prison cell, whenever they've been bad, and you have to be quiet and do work. That was always bad, and I got put in there. There was 2 of them in the school. One of them was padded.
I had difficulties when I was at secondary school, and I found it really hard to transition from primary to secondary. And I ended up being classified as school phobic. So I spent 2 years where I was out of school, and then I went to a PRU. And I think from that point on, having the people helping me get back into education and get some qualifications kind of spurred me to want to support other people who were having a similar journey.
When he went to primary school, he was getting into trouble quite a bit in the playground. He wasn't paying attention in class, but academically he was one of the top 2 students, so he was achieving a lot. But from the teaching staff perspective, he was disruptive. He was quite challenging, and we saw some of that at home, perhaps not as much as school, and we suggested having an assessment. Unfortunately, the school only had budget for 1 or 2 assessments with a psychological assessor a year, and because my son was doing so well academically, they didn't see it as a necessity to put him forward. So it wasn't until he started secondary school when we got a phone call to say, is there something we should know? And that kind of was the start of, I'd say, sort of 3 to 4 years of hell, really. So he was diagnosed as having Asperger's and ADD, and unfortunately the school environment he was in had very little understanding of how to cope, how to deal with students who were neurodiverse.
I think the one thing I would say is that me and my husband both were the product of mainstream education, and it worked relatively well for us, and I think initially we just didn't question it. That's what everybody did. Everyone goes to school, they learn the same way, they do the same curriculum, and we didn't really challenge it or question it. And I think in hindsight maybe we should have done that sooner and realised actually that the mainstream school and curriculum just wasn't working and isn't always the answer at all.
But yeah, I think a lot of it is, I mean, if we're going down the whole kind of special needs route, a lot of it is dealing with students in a mainstream setting that can't access that setting. And, you know, you've got 32 children in your class, and maybe 5 or 6 of them, you know, really struggle, and you don't feel like you can do the best for those students in that situation because you can't, it's impossible.
Mainstream schools are not a good place for children that have additional needs. I've had the whole experience, schools with units, mainstream schools with one-to-ones. It doesn't work. It's not the right environment. It doesn't help them. It actually hinders them. And all you do is break all of their confidence and trust in the people that are supposed to be entrusted to get them to where you want them to be.
You look at the young people that we're trying to support, and it's poles apart in terms of, you know, the environments, the approach to teaching, the attitudes of a lot of teachers, young and old, is not about working with young people who have... I want to be really careful about saying challenging behaviour, because everybody jumps to naughty or boisterous or violent or aggressive. And challenging behaviour isn't those things. And challenged behaviours are born out of anxiety. So I almost want to say they have difficulty working with the level of anxiety that our young people face. But if they could see the anxiety, actually they probably could work with it, but all they see is the behaviour, so therefore they don't. And therefore we have huge numbers of maintained schools that just can't meet the need of a large proportion of our population.
School pupils, again, a mixed bag. Some took him for who he was, funny, quirky, smart, really bright guy. Others, he was a little bit odd, so he was physically and verbally abused. He was called all sorts of names, which really affected his self-esteem, confidence levels, and ultimately his attendance. So he was really reluctant to go into school. Things came to a head really when his absenteeism, if you like, we discovered was also resulting in self-harm. And my son ended up being out of school for 3 years. The school weren't able to support him. And unfortunately, with council cutbacks, we were unable to find an appropriate school for him. And it took three and a half years to find, actually, surprisingly, the school that's within walking distance of our house, which had a newly opened provision for kids with neurodiversity.
We went through a process of taking our son out of mainstream education and putting him into a special school. That was a really difficult decision to make, because you're basically saying, we're not going to give you the same educational opportunities as other people. But we made that decision because our son, we knew, was going to suffer in the maintained sector, and we also knew that if he was in a classroom with 36 other kids, there'd be 35 other children that would suffer because of him. And sometimes as a parent of a neurodivergent student, you need to realise that actually your kid is different and your kid has different needs. And, yes, put them on medication, put them in a special school. It's a difficult decision to make, but actually it's the right decision to make. And whilst it took us a year to make that decision, we've never looked back. We put him on meds, it improved his life dramatically. We put him in a special school, and his first lesson, I remember his first lesson, he played Monopoly for 6 hours. And I went into the school afterwards as the educator going, I didn't move him to another school to play board games. And his teacher said, yes, but we've done literacy, we've done numeracy, we've talked about, the bank, he's added up everything, he's been in charge of money, so he's been doing numbers all day. And you walk away just thinking, yes, actually, that was the right decision to make.
So Adam is now at a specialist school. That was a very, very difficult process. So in spite of the fact that he has clinical diagnoses of ADHD, autism and dyspraxia, so his fine motor skills, his ability to hold a pencil, to write, is on the 0.03rd percentile, as in non-existent. And in spite of those diagnoses, it took 10 months of almost full-time work for me to battle, and that really is the word, for me to battle to get him an EHCP and to get him into a special school. I joke, and it shouldn't really be a joke, but part of what I do as a business consultant is helping people with project management, and I teach businesses kind of all the productivity tools and things. And I actually, to this day, use as the example of the biggest project management sheet I ever had was my son's EHCP process. I actually use that in training business to say, this is the most complicated project you are ever going to have to do. The documentation, the links, the legislation.
You see parents battling to get their kids into good schools. Well, try and find a good school when most schools won't work with your child because on their paperwork it suggests that they have violent behaviour. When often that child doesn't actually have violent behaviour, they have a reaction to a set of anxieties born out of an environment. You change that environment, you change the reaction of the child. And therefore you don't have a child that exhibits challenging behaviours. You have a child who's settled and confident and learning and building resilience and having positive experiences. And then you write the paperwork about that child, and then every school would want them.
The other thing that mainstream schools maybe don't have the opportunity to do as much is to be positive. You know, a lot of it is about chastising, punishing if they're not doing what they should be, and there's just as many, if not a lot more opportunities to be praising the positive aspects alongside it, so that the overall experience of education is positive. Because education is not just about school. You know, life is a whole learning process. You know, nobody stops learning at the age of 16 or 18 when you stop going to school, and you need to be able to view learning as positive so that you can continue to grow through your adult life. And unfortunately, for lots of young people who are neurodiverse and have had that negative initial experience, all their view is that they want to get out of education and they never want to kind of re-engage with it, and that closes off lots of opportunities for really bright young people who have, you know, the potential to be really successful, but maybe haven't been shown that previously.
I do understand that funds are limited, so there aren't enough special school places for all the children that need them, but it does still feel at the minute that the children who are getting those places, and very fortunate that our son is one of them, but they're the ones who've got parents like me who are capable and determined to get through that process, and that just makes me sad for the children who don't get those school places because they don't have those same advantages of people who... All parents will fight for their children, that's just natural, but there's being able to fight, and there's having the ability to fight the system in the right way to get the outcome that you need. When we got him into the school that he's now at, which is a fantastic school, within a week it's like having a different child, and that difference is so stark